April 1940, from No Outspan by Deneys Reitz. For several months after my return from England, the war seemed to hang fire. And then, in April 1940, the storm broke. I remember that I had gone up to the Transvaal to open a new irrigation scheme among the Barberton Mountains. And as I was about to perform the ceremony before a large audience, I heard a shout. I looked up and saw a runaway motor car tearing down the slope straight into the crowd. It killed and wounded a number of people, and I was hurled clear over a fence. That night at the hospital, I heard a woman's voice from out of the dark say that the news had come on the wireless of German warships steaming up the coast to invade Norway, and during the next few days came news of the fighting at Stavanger, Trondheim, and elsewhere. Soon followed the rape of Belgium and Holland, the fall of France, the declaration of war by the Italians, and the grave plight of the British Army in Flanders. We were kept advised of the position from London each day. The British government cabled us at first that they hoped to evacuate 20,000 men to England. The next day they spoke of 40,000, and the day after that they even spoke of saving 80,000. Then came the Epic of Dunkirk and the bringing away of almost the whole of the expeditionary force. Out here in South Africa, we too were faced by what seemed to be a dangerous situation. Italy had 200,000 soldiers in Abyssinia, and we expected an immediate move to invade Kenya, and in due course our own country, for at the time there was little to stop them. Kenya had a few battalions of askari, and, as for a South African army, it had existed largely on paper when the war began, though General Smuts was feverishly at work building up a new one, and volunteers were flocking to the colours. In the meantime, the Afrikaner racial extremists openly exulted at the British reverses. In Parliament and over the countryside, they shouted that England was but a twitching corpse, and that Hitler would dictate his peace terms in London within 6 weeks. The British Empire was crumbling, and they were going to establish an Afrikaner dictatorship, in which General Smuts and his followers were to be called to account on Gestapo lines. And a strange movement had sprung up to implement these threats. It was known as the Ossewa Brandwag, the Oxwagon Picket. Its members, which were said to number 250,000, drilled secretly at night, and they indulged in bomb-throwing, sabotage, and other subversive acts quite foreign to the normal character of our Afrikaans people. Their avowed intention was to prepare an organization modeled on the Nazi system, which would take control the moment word came that Great Britain was crushed. General Smuts and I, and most of our colleagues, took the view that in the long run our Afrikaans-speaking citizens were too level-headed to be permanently led astray by alien propaganda of this kind. From long experience, we felt that in a country like the Union, it would be a mistake to create cheap martyrs. So we gave the Ossewa Brandwag and our other opponents plenty of rope. Their overdone racial fervour smacked to us of the juju and voodooism of Lagos and the Gold Coast. Not everyone on our side agreed with us, and there was a time when I could not show my face anywhere without some well-meaning but irate and jittery individual rushing at me to demand the shooting out of hand of every Ossewa Brandwag firebrand and the instant jailing of all opposition members of parliament and political leaders. General Smuts told me he suffered from similar importunities, and that his invariable reply was, "Leave it to us, leave it to us. We know what we are doing. Please don't rock the boat." Time has amply justified us. Now, in 1943, the Ossewa Brandwag has practically fizzled out, and the various Republican groups that sprang up in the hope of an immediate German victory are at present so busy wrangling among themselves that we scarcely give them a thought. All along, I have striven to avoid, as far as possible, overmuch reference to our intertribal stupidities, but I was forced to touch on them here and there for the sake of giving an idea of the South African political background. I have only this final word on the subject. Our white population is under 3 million. Of these, roughly 55% are of Dutch descent and 40 to 45% are of British extraction. Of the Dutch section, about half are standing aloof from the war effort. They hold that the war is in the interests of Great Britain alone, that it is none of our business, and that we had no right to drag them into the maelstrom. And yet, in an army of volunteers, something like 35% of our soldiers and 35% of our casualties in Abyssinia and Libya have been Afrikaners. And there is another list, which it may be lacking in good taste and subtlety to call a casualty list. It is the notices of engagements and marriages between Afrikaans and English couples that appear in the newspapers every day. These show that they are intermingling and intermarrying all the time in rising tempo, and that by 1960 or thereabouts, even the racial politicians will not be able to tell them apart. So much for local politics as I see them. All this time, General Smuts was hard at work, and in spite of our small population and our racial differences, he produced the strongest army in our history, with more than 200,000 men in the field. They went first to Kenya for the expected Italian onslaught, and when that did not materialize, they went to Abyssinia. In a short and brilliant campaign, some 40,000 British and South African troops sent a vastly greater Italian army into headlong flight. As for our men, I was told that an Italian army document was picked up which read, "The Italian troops are retreating in good order. The South African troops are advancing in the wildest confusion. This was probably just what did take place. In our campaign in German West in 1915, General Botha's shaggy horsemen came galloping through the bush with no semblance of discipline, but relentlessly hustling their opponents. Hauptmann Franke, the German commander-in-chief, was so outraged by their breach of military decorum that he flung up his arms to heaven and exclaimed, "This is not war, it's a hippodrome!" But inside a week, he and all his men were prisoners. It was like the story of the British soldier in the Crimean War. He lay in hospital with a sabre cut across his skull. A kind-hearted old lady asked him how he had come by his hurts, and he said, "It was like this, Mum. The Russians don't know about fighting. I rides at one of them there Cossacks with me sword, and I gives him the thrust. Instead of giving me the parry, the bloody fool hits me over the head." Our soldiers in Abyssinia paraphrased Mr. Churchill's famous speech by saying, "Never before have so few done so much to so many." That, in short, is a good account of what happened. When the campaign was over, the South African troops went to Libya, where they fought with unvarying fortitude.